we were at the stage when you joined Fortis, the erstwhile Wockhardt Hospital. Please tell us your experiences at Wockhardt. How was it different from Bombay Hospital and private practice?
So, most important thing which I found in the Wockhardt Hospital was the professional approach and very ethical atmosphere. And I will say the credit goes to the owners, Mr. Purakiwala, and the team which he has kept to look after the hospital. And also highest standard of transparency as far as dealing with the patients also. That was also another plus point. And the working atmosphere which was available. It was a young team, anesthetists, intensivists, and everybody, new team for me, but I found them very enthusiastic and very competent.
And I understand that you also had surgical residents working with you, GI, and because of your experience as a teacher, I understand it got recognized for GI and Hep Bill. Did you notice any difference in the quality of residents?
Let me put that, yes, when I joined here and in year's time, we applied for a DNB surgery recognition from the national board and we got it. And I'm proud that I had 6 students during my tenure there, and all of them have done well in the practical life after acquiring their super specialty degree of DNB surgery. Uh, as far as the difference is concerned, I will tell you one thing that when I was at Bombay Hospital or here at Wockhardt, the people who came to work with me had some goals and they knew my reputation from back from my old colleagues and residents in KM Hospital that I am a no nonsense person. So those who came, they were motivated, so they worked sincerely. I'm it's, apart from that, these group of people who worked at Wockhardt got a degree at the end of it, and those who worked at a Bombay hospital, they got only a training day about it. That's the only difference.
Right, sir. And were you able to carry out your teaching program, which you are so passionate about, and or research of any kind while you were at Wockhardt?
Yes. So teaching definitely. Now, the important part one has to understand when the surgical training is start. The surgical training is not like medical training. Medical training, you have to see the patient, diagnose, and then you can write on the paper. Nothing is practically with the hands. Surgical training is different, where you have to train the people into the surgical skills. And that's where the whole challenge comes. And in the private practice, you don't have a high volume. It's not like Tata Hospital or KM Hospital. So with the limited clinical material, you have to train the people to the level what they would have achieved if they would have been trained in the Tata or the public and KM Hospital. So that was a challenge. And I think my students can tell you better than I saying that. I think when they finished, they could, and they are performing all those complex surgeries, including hepatic section, shunt surgery, and Whipple's operation, which anybody else trained at any other place would have done.
Right, sir. In fact, we have one of your very illustrious students who actually has gone on to head the hepatobiliary unit at Tata Memorial Hospital, Dr. Mahesh Goel, amongst your many other students. So, I mean, it is a testimony more to your teaching and your training as much as it is to his own abilities.
Yeah, these were very, very dear student of mine from KM days when he was a house.
Right, sir. And then, of course, Fortis happened. So, what are the difference between working under the Wockhardt management versus the Fortis management?
Yeah, see, the thing is that basically what happens when the management changes, the top level, and particularly the ownership changes, there's always a different philosophy in the corporate world, and which each corporate has got its own philosophy, and that philosophy changes. Sometimes that philosophy doesn't match with your own philosophy. and you go on. See, one has to learn that you can't change others' philosophy, but you can also learn to change your philosophy or stay with your philosophy and say, okay, I'm happy with what I am doing. Keep on doing what you are happy. So that's what the policy I.
That's that's wonderful. I think right through the interview, we have realized that it is an uncompromising sticking to one's principles. And I think that has been your biggest motto in life, as far as I seem to realize that, fight for and maintain your own, what you believe in passionately. So, sir, then you started working at other hospitals like Zen Hospital, and then took on this probably your swan song, your chairmanship of the Zonal Transplant Coordination Committee. Tell us the journey. I'm sure it began much before that, but tell us your journey as to how you finally, the state considered you good enough to be the chairman of this very important and very ethical committee.
So let me see that when I came back after my training in liver transplantation for about 1990, the aim was to do the liver transplant, but we know that we needed a brain dead donor, and that time brain dead was not recognized in the country or legalized in the country. So a lot of people were making attempt to get the bill passed in the parliament. And as far as Maharashtra is concerned, there were a group of people in which late Dr. V.N. Acharya, professor of nephrology from KEM Hospital, and who was my senior colleague. So he got me into it, and we were the advisor to the government of Maharashtra, along with few more people, to advise about the bill first. And once the bill got passed in 1994 and 95, when it was, we decided how to implement it. Because there were a lot of criticism that just passing the bill doesn't mean that you will get the organs. And now you are banning the living donor transplant, and there's a lot of hue and cry and amongst the public and the medical profession. So to counter that, the government formed a committee, and I was lucky to be part of that committee starting from 1995 to prepare the guidelines how to. And that's why we prepared the two major bodies. One was the state level, which is called the Maharashtra Confederation for Organ Transplant, and second was the zonal level. And zones were defined as the revenue divisions. So Mumbai became first to come into picture, and it was emphasized on the Society Act. So it is an independent body created by the government with the government representative as a member. But this has got its own constitution, and we elect our president, vice president, whole executive committee. So I've been working with them in different capacities, and finally in 2018, everybody decided that yes, I should take over the mental of the being the president of this society. So I've been lucky for getting that position.
I don't know what luck, but definitely well deserved, certainly. I understand there must have been a lot of difficulties in the initial years. It must have impinged a lot on your time, which you had already committed to a lot of other projects. How difficult was it, especially in the early years when the thing was in its infancy? How much time did you have to spend? How much time did you have to do nights and all? Tell us the difficulties, because you made it sound so easy, but I'm sure there were a lot of hurdles in the path.
Yeah. So let me put it this way: when I was very busy in the clinical practices, say in the KEM days, that time we were committing one Friday for this purpose, and we used to go to the DHS office and sit with the people there, authorities there, and say that this is what we should do about and all that, and creation of the awareness within the hospital. And I will say I was very lucky because again the heads of the neuro department, Dr. Pandya at that time, and the anesthesia department, Dr. Deval, and several other people, they're so cooperative. I mean, they will come forward once they understood the importance of the organ donation and saving the life. They were forthcoming. They will stop me in the corridor and say, Dr. Mathur, we have a person with a neurological death. That was the atmosphere in KEM at that time. Anyway, once I took over this position of the presidency, naturally the responsibility becomes more. Though we have a secretary and joint secretary. So here, yes, odd hours, when the distribution is going on, if the coordinators are the main people who do the job, but if they have a technical difficulties, which has to be sorted out, then yes, I have to do the job. So it becomes, yes, you remain awake in the night to sort out the things, and nothing goes to go wrong.
Right. So, I mean, I'm just talking, with respect to even your personal life, because you have put in so much commitment at every level. And how did it affect you? And how did I'm sure your family is supportive without behind every successful man, etc., etc. But at any point, did you feel that you were taking away time from family, which as your children grew up, or when you were younger and you are recently married? Of course, this question should probably be better asked to madam, but sir, what is your view on that?
No, see, the thing is that let me confess one thing. I could achieve in my life, I could devote myself totally to my clinical work or academic work or to my students or the patient is only because of support from my wife. Okay. Uh, in her own right, she was a brilliant student. She was a merit holder in Delhi University from Lady Hardinge Medical College. And she suppressed her desire to excel in the academic field and looked after the children. And one of the stories which I would like to share is when the riots were happening, remember that 93, and we were all busy in KEM managing those. The children were in the school, St. Mary's. And St. Mary's School, you know the location where it is, Mazgaon. And she went there. The taxi left her halfway down, walked. She was stopped by the policeman saying that there is firing going on, madam, you can't go. She said, my children are there. You do whatever you want. I'm going there.
Wow.
And she got them out.
Wow.
So that's the support I had. And that's the reason I could achieve whatever I have achieved.
Yes, sir. And while we are at the subject of the family, I understand you have very illustrious children, one of whom has gone on to become eminent transplant surgeon in the US. Could you tell us more about your children, sir?
So, yeah, I have two sons. The elder one, both did the medicine from here. Both went abroad. The younger one has followed into my footsteps and decided to, at one time, I told him why you want to get into this is a very committed field and not so much of rewards as far as the monetary rewards are concerned. But he committed himself. He said, this is my decision. I want to do it. Fine. You do whatever you want, what makes you happy. The elder one went to Harvard. He did his MPH and healthcare management fellowship from there, and then got the job in the McKinsey as a healthcare manager. But he is extra intelligent. Let me put it, in the whole family, after my wife, he is the most intelligent person. Right. And you know that the most intelligent people think laterally. Right. So he said, I don't want to serve for us, work for others. I want to do the things myself. So he's of his own. He has experimented with several other things apart from the healthcare. He said, I don't want to do anything. And but now he does the consultancy for the others.
Wonderful.
That's what.
Wonderful. So we'll get back to our training of residents. Are you satisfied with the residency training program as it is? What would you suggest will be improvements which future generations of teachers should incorporate? So,
see, the whole thing is that we always talk about the generation gaps in these things. Let's say my time and your time. Okay, present time and my time was the golden time and this time is the useless time. It's nothing like that. It's nothing like that. See, teachers have to evolve themselves according to the circumstances. If you don't, if you keep on living in the past, okay, that golden era, you lose that shine. Okay, you have to evolve yourself to remain today's relevant. Okay, what is the relevance? Now, if you see the residency program during my time, There were 6 residents in the unit. There were enough work. There were enough interaction at a personal level, and the training was very supervised training. Now, what I hear that each unit has got extra seats created, so there are 10, 20, 30 people are there in the unit, and naturally the clinical work remains same, the ability to the theater remains the same, and that training gets affected. So you have to improvise. How do you do it? I come back to my what I did in the prior practice for training these residents. Less number, but whatever you make them do perfectly. Once they learn, they will never forget. That is the key.
No, sir, I want to go a little further. Very few programs have any emphasis on research, analytical thinking, critical thinking, which has been very integral part of your own career. I don't see it happening in the current scenario. For that matter, I remember as residents, as you rightly said, when I was a resident, there was so much work. And I must have operated at least, I think, 4 or 5 times what the average resident of today gets. But the biggest deficiency, which I think when I reflect back on my own training, was that it was purely unsupervised work. So I may have done a lot of work, but if I didn't do it right by myself, or I was not told that what you're not doing is not right, that habit would stick to me for the rest of my surgical career. And since we were in public hospitals where the responsibility, unfortunately or fortunately, whatever it is, to the patients was not as much as it is in private practice, we were maybe some of us were definitely quite cavalier in our approach. All we were interested in is in the cutting work. What about the clinical experience? What about the critical thinking? And what about which person to operate, which person not to operate? And most important, what we lack probably, because now both my children are in the US, and what I see is the big thing is the emphasis on research. We have no research to talk about. So how do you?
Yeah. So, Rajesh, you have put 2 questions into one. Okay. One is the research itself. The second is the training of the practical. So let's talk of the research first, since you started with the research. Now, for me, research doesn't mean a molecular level research. Okay. It's not always that you have to do molecular research. Yes, you can do it. Specialties are doing great. I was interested in that kind of thing. I did my postgraduate thesis, perhaps people will not know. It was CSF serotonin level in neurological disorders.
Wow.
And that research I had to do in the defense research lab. I had to go and do the work in that. Okay. So I had that interest, but facilities are not always there. And my way of thinking is that every patient of yours is a research subject. If you don't understand, if it is not a standard thing. So give the example of, say, portal hypertension. When I was getting trained, until 1982, surgery was the mainstay. And there was high mortality when the emergency surgery was being done for a patient with variceal bleeding. And that time, abroad, the endoscopy sclerotherapy was just picking up, came up. And being endoscopist, I said, why don't we practice it? Now, the obstacles were, we don't have injector, which has to be imported, which was very expensive, so KEM hospital cannot afford it. Second, the sclerosant also has to be imported, which was also expensive. So what to do? And that stimulated me. You have to find a solution. So along with late Dr. Bhale Rao, we sat together and I said, see, we are using phenol for our piles. Okay, phenol is a sclerosant. Did the research, found one German reference, German language, with the abstract in English, that it can be used was the word. Then went into a pharmacopoeia book. So then first thing we did, and see, I don't want to make the human being as a guinea pig. So always used to do the animal experiments. Use the phenol in these things first, which was used for piles at that time. And then we found in the pharmacopoeia books that phenol is mixable with water to prepare the aqueous solution that made the life easy because it can flow through the thin needles. And did all the work in the dogs compared with the imported thing which we purchased at that time for research purpose and showed that this phenol is as good or rather better than that. And then we use it in the human beings and there's a lot of work. Now, this was just this is not a major research, but this was based on the clinical requirement and resulted that we could do thousands of endoscopic fluorotherapy on the poor patients without making the patient or the hospital spend too much of money. So I think the research is to find the local solution at par with the international level. That's what should be the way. So that's called innovation, basically. It's not the true research, it is an innovation. The second part you asked me was the training, unsupervised enlisting. I'm sure if Dr. Abhay Dalvi and Balia Kulkarni and these people are listening to or when they listen to it, they will say, you did contrary to what Rajesh is saying. And that was the rule in my unit that no patient in emergency will be operated on without lecturer seeing the patient first. Means residents will see good resuscitation part, but lecturer has to approve yes, this patient requires surgery. Number one. Number two, lecturer has to be around and supervise all the surgeries in emergency. So Abhay used to sleep in the MOT on a stretcher so that he keeps eye on all the residents what they are doing inside it. So see, I know that when there's large volume, they have been cutting and this thing unsupervised, but I don't subscribe to it. I don't subscribe to it. I didn't subscribe at that time. I don't subscribe to it even today. I think the training has to be a supervised training, and then the person becomes more confident in doing the right thing. That's what my view.
Yes. So, sir, this actually the truth of what you are saying was brought home to me, not in Nair, where I trained, or for that matter in KEM as a pediatric surgeon. But basically, it was brought home to me whenever I visited the US. Every surgery there has been started either by the fellow or the resident. But the attending has been standing on the opposite side and will stand there till the last suture has been taken. There is nothing like, you finish it off or you do it all. And probably it has to do with the very severe legal consequences of having poor results in the US. But even the surgeons there, I mean, every case, I mean, I would not say every case, but 95% of the cases will be started by the junior. My own daughter just now sent me some VIPs. He was VIP enough that the paparazzi were in the procedure. But she's a first year pulmonary fellow and she was doing that VVIP's bronchoscopy. It didn't matter who it was. Whereas we and that I'm terribly impressed with that. But we seem to be, even if it is a ward boy's mother, it should be done by the. Yeah, yes, sir.
Yeah, no, see, social pressures are here more. I agree with that. The social pressures are more here. But what you said, see, that's how I got trained and that's how I trained the people. Okay. I was lucky to be trained by a person who was very sincere and this thing, but he believed in the supervision. Late Professor Darkar, who was basically neurosurgery and head of the genesis department in my institution. But that's what I felt. See, I will tell you, whenever the house surgeon has to do the first hydrosis, my rule was, you will assess me first, how I do it. So you will learn first, everything. When you are doing, I'll be the one who will be supervising, not the registrar or the immediate senior. I used to assess every operation which are meant for hydrogen to do. I will show them how to do it, and then I will assist him also to do it before I leave him to the other people to assist him.
What is your assessment of the average level of residence during your career? And another difference between us and the Western society is just like how we assess our residents. we have no system where they can assess us as teachers. And that results in a lot of tanashahi, if I may say. We just, we are lords. Once we have reached a certain level, we feel that we are beyond everything. And since there is no stick on our head or nobody to appraise us apart from departmental politics, we feel that we are very much on our own. It is, I think, as much more to our own disadvantage because we tend to stagnate. These children will then go abroad, learn different things. But once we are convinced that nobody can be better than us, so why not have a system where even the teachers are appraised and assessed?
Yes. So I won't deny your first statement, the Tanashai. Yes, I was Tanashai also. Means I insisted on certain type of discipline, certain type of the way the notes have to be written, the way the patient has to be seen, the way the dressing has to be done, the way the evening round has to be reported to me in the night. And I know that I was quite a rising person when I'm on the phone taking the rounds and ask several other small things which perhaps they might have missed out. But at the same time, I had a very open mind. I always believe that as a teacher, you learn from your students. It's never like I know everything. No. And it's always when a student asks you some difficult question which you have never thought of. Perhaps it didn't cross your mind, you didn't check in the book or you didn't learn it. And that is the time you should be bold enough to say, I don't know this. I think I would like to see, and you also look at it. Now that time it was only library. There were no Google. So you can't do immediate solution. So both of, whether the student who is asking the question or the teacher, both had to visit the library, read it, and next day it used to be that you tell what did you find out, and then I will explain why it is like this and not it is like that. See, there are two things: one, what is written there, and second, understanding of the written material and explaining why I'm doing what is given and I'm not doing similar thing. Why? That's where dictate should not come. The way to convince your junior or the colleague is that you should have a proper scientific explanation to say that why I want to do this in this way rather than that way. That is the. So yes, this feedback part, what you are saying, I applied it, though officially it was never there, but I applied it to UG my batches, which used to post it. So at the end of the posting of the undergraduate students at 3 months, and they used to make my unit used to be only basically final year students used to come. And so I used to tell them that last day you are going to evaluate all the teachers. That means house surgeon right up to me. And there was a 10 points. So this thing out of 10 marks they have to give to everybody. And at the end, they don't have to disclose their identity. So that no punitive action can be taken or something can be carried by anybody against them. So they used to write beautiful evaluation and there was a column for remarks. So sometimes they will say, so and so is not punctual, or so and so doesn't read properly and then doesn't tell us properly, then that thing. Now that feedback, I didn't take that against my juniors, but I told them in different way how to improve upon. And that helped in ultimately teaching program of the unit. As far as the PGs and their feedback is concerned, yes, at the end of their posting, I used to talk to them and ask them what they think that should be improved in the working of the unit. Which sometimes I still ask them. So it's not an official, but officially it should be. What is in the US, that system should be brought here, is the appraisal of the teacher by the residents and the students, which is confidential.
Absolutely, sir. Of course, I think in the US, it has gone a little too extreme. I was speaking to my sister who was a professor in speech pathology. And she says, and we were discussing the fact that we have a lot of vivas and practical exams, though not there during the COVID times. But she said we also prefer to have them. But then the students started complaining that, giving too much of a feedback, saying that it's too stressful. So just because the students felt it was too stressful, they had to eliminate it and make it all multiple choice, which leads to a very different way of, studying or, trying to learn, which might be different from practical. So that's the other extreme. Now, as far as this, you had alluded to the fact that there are too many residents, and I think that is our biggest grouse. I think for whatever political reasons that we have, where to make increasing number of reservations palatable, the government tends to increase the number of seats as a sort of a SOP, so that, okay, so the number of seats are nearly the same. But I can understand in a medical branch where really their hands-on experience is not that important, as much as in a surgical branch. You can, of course, look at the internet resources, but nothing can substitute for the actual performing of procedures. How can we do something to get, this is a very slippery slope down which we seem to be sliding forever.
So I will say that currently the policy of the government is that after you finish your post-graduation, okay, or undergraduate or super specialty, to fulfill the bond requirement, you have to serve for 1 to 3 years. Now that is the excellent time in which they should not be posted in the hospital where they've been trained. They should be posted in the peripheral. Send them to the district hospital. There are senior surgeons here who can supervise them. But there they will get the chance to do these surgeries independently, what they learned here. And lot more than that, because the challenges in district hospitals are much bigger. And that will give them the practical training. So use them not as an additional hand in a central hospital, send them to the peripheral hospital, not to the some village or something. No, send them to district hospital where all the facilities are there, and let them work there. They will get the practical experience, which will be equivalent to what they have missed out during the race.
So, sir, do you think, great point you raised about district hospitals, and you did not mention anything about rural primary health centers. What do you think of this government initiative? Each and every successive government, irrespective of political ideology, has tried to impose or improve the rural health system by targeting the very vulnerable and weak residents who have no choice and who are pushed into the periphery, into so-called rural areas. Just like if there is no, there are always ways out, and people have used the ways out, and majority have used the ways out. It has served no purpose ever. Do you really support this, or should it be emphasized that it should be at this more and more district level hospitals?
So I feel I don't subscribe to this policy. Let me be very frank. You look at this way: a young boy who has passed his MBBS. He's not MBBS today of previous year, during our time when the number of residents were less, number of interns were less, and we had enough opportunity to do the lot of surgeries as an intern. Today they don't get the chance. So they are not actually fully practically trained. They may have a degree to handle the complex situations which are prevalent in the villages. Now you are pushing a young boy who has got aspiration, who, if get married, has got children to look after, and to a place where he himself falls sick, he will not get the facilities. So the solution is not this. Solution is that we have a lot of people who are retiring from the service. Say, in the different, you see the railways healthcare, you see the army, services, armies, and you look at even the civilian, where these people are retiring at the age of 60, 62. But they are mentally alert, they are physically active. But they have fulfilled all their, whatever the responsibilities towards the family and children is concerned. send them what is called so-called sannyas into the villages, re-employed, give them the facilities there. They will be, see, they will serve as a not only for medical care, but also social upliftment of the society there. Because of their gray hair, because of the age, their word will have a meaning to the villagers. They will listen to them. And they can help in improving the uh, local people's healthcare in a big way. Also, teach. The second is you have to have a village development program. See, you look at the villages abroad, Western. They are not villages. They've got all the facilities. They are well connected. So you have to have a village development program. Now, village development cannot be done by the government. I'm very sure of it. Because whatever government money goes, in spite of the current policy of direct transfer and all that thing, it's sometimes not utilized in all that. What you should do is the industrial houses should be made to adopt the village. They can set up the whole township there, which will develop industry. So it will give the employment to the local people. They should be given responsibility to create a good educational institution there, right from the kindergarten right up to the degree level. They can create a medical college there and give the preference to the local boys of the villages to get the admission first. Then you can have an outsider come. That will improve because those people, they are living there, they have grown up there, they will get their training there. They can come to the bigger institution, Mumbai, Calcutta, everywhere, and Delhi to uplift their distance. But then can go back and they will help in improving the healthcare system of the villages. And the village development, the education will develop, health will develop. And that's what you need.
What about the current burning question of the times, which is COVID? Firstly, how has it affected you? How has it benefited you? How has it hurt you? And the fact that again, coming back to your love of residence and teaching, how do you replace the lost years of surgical residents who have got limited number of years, or even medical residents, pediatric residents, who have only been seeing COVID? How their training has definitely suffered. So firstly at a personal level, and then at the level of the, again, residents and teaching.
So at a personal level, yes. If you look at this way that I took the lockdown very seriously, apart from that being with the age and some comorbidities. Yes. It's not out of fear. It's, I think, once the requirement was that you should restrict the movement rather than doing unnecessary movements. It is a lockdown gives an opportunity for us, person like me, to see how much strong is good willpower to discipline yourself. It's very tough to stay indoors for a year and not going to do the thing which you are used to do on daily basis. So yes, I miss out that thing, that practically operating or practically seeing the patient, palpating the patient and all that thing, directly interacting. Yes, I remain in touch on basis of the telemedicine, which is the technology helps us or guiding even the residents on off, but it is not of the same level as what it used to when I was coming to the hospital physically. But I think what I believe in the life, that one should learn to switch on and switch off. You have to move on. I moved on from public institution where the research and teaching was very intense and even service was very intense as far as the patient is concerned, to a private sector. I adjusted to it on my own principle. Moved from one hospital to another hospital, but kept on switching off the thing. Kept the good memories, bad memories on the background. Yes, sometimes they crop up, but most of the time they won't find the expression. So same thing happens here. You have to adjust yourself mentally. Otherwise, you can go mad if you don't adjust. So that's what I feel. that's what I've been doing. Fortunately for me, I've started what's called case-based discussion for my people who have worked with me in the past, and they are consultant now. And all of us face some difficult cases. And I said that why don't you put it on the group and let's see what everybody says. And then I try to moderate in a way. So I think that keeps me going as far as the teaching part is concerned. Now coming to the training of the residents during the COVID, yes. Again, as you are saying, the medical part, it is can be compensated well because you can. This COVID is one, but there are always medical patients have got other things. They will have a heart problem, they will have a neurological problem. So you keep on remaining in touch with the rest of the parts. In the surgical, because the elective surgery was stopped, that affects the surgical training. Though the emergency training, I don't think would have affected because the patients who are coming with the perforation or the obstructions or the gangrenes and other things, they cannot stay. They had to come and they had to be treated. So that I think emergency training part would not have suffered. Elective surgery must have. Now, so that's where that question comes that all these people who worked in the COVID period and missed out on the elective surgery should be given an extra term, year or so, not here, send them to the peripheral and let them get the elective one.
So, sir, this point is very valid. Why not make it actually compulsory so that their training is completed and they get adequate surgical experience in a, as you said, district hospital or a peripheral hospital, rather than stay on in the unit where there are just a few extra pairs of hands and the work gets divided even further. So maybe, you know, somebody listening in, or sir, even you with your good offices can suggest it to the powers that be. That way, everybody will be a winner. The patients, the residents, the hospitals, everybody will be a winner if they can be incorporated. All that the government has to do is to bear the cost of employing these people. And it is not only just an empty cost, it is finally going to be rewarded in terms of better patient care.
As it is, they have to fulfill their bond period. Government is also obliged to employ them.
Right.
So why not to employ them rather than keeping them in BMC hospital in Mumbai?
Right.
Send them to the district hospital.
Right.
Why not to do that?
Right, sir.
Yeah, sir, Rajesh, this is one of my weak points. I will confess, is the powers to be had never been my forte. Okay, somehow or other I have never been favorite of the powers to be, and that's why even if I talk here, I am in no position to carry it to the powers who can take the decision. Yes, my students, lot of them are in the position where they can take it if they feel like they should do it.
I do hope people will get inspired and start thinking well beyond their narrow own personal interests. Very interesting point you raised about switching off. It has been my observation that many type A personalities, and there are many in the field of medicine, are completely obsessed, and they are actually one horse race. There's only one focus: my practice, or my teaching, and my profession. And comes the day of retirement, or God forbid, some illness which prevents you from doing what you were used to doing. And they find themselves going slowly but surely mad, that they don't know what to do with themselves. And they just can't spend time with themselves. I find them miserable and actually saying, what will I do? I have talked to a few people and they say, what can I do? I'm good only for practicing medicine. And I tell them, sir or madam, but now you're not capable of, because of whatever condition you have. But he says, he or she say that I am going bonkers. What have been your interests apart from the field of medicine? How do you envisage a field where now you're fit? I mean, you may have a little bit of morbidity, but you're otherwise fit and fine. There is nothing physically or mentally restraining, apart from COVID, of course. How do you propose to what interests do you already have? What will you be developing during your retirement? And what advice do you have that people shouldn't get into this trap?
So let me put it this way: how I keep myself occupied during this period. So this period is almost like a retirement period for me.
Absolutely, it is a yeah. It is a trailer. The COVID has been a trailer.
Yeah, it's a trailer. So see, one of the most, of course, I've taken this organ donation part as a mission right now, because my mission, which I always say, is that the India should be number one in organ donation, and we should not have any need for live donor transplantation in this country. And I've got a strong belief in this, because if you look at 150,000 people die every year because of the head accident. Almost equal number must be dying of the cerebrovascular stroke. And even if you convert 20% or 25% of that, we generate, each disease donor gives at least minimum 3 to 8 organs. So all the waiting list for the liver, kidney, heart, lung will get wiped out. You won't have to depend on the living donor. So this is service to the human. And I feel that this is something which is my mission or goal, whatever you can call, at this stage. How much I will be able to achieve, I don't know. Fortunately, during this period of 3 years where I've been occupying as a president, and fortunately, day for yesterday only, I've been given the extension for another 3 years. The Mumbai and Maharashtra is currently number one in organ donation in the country. People talk a lot that Tamil Nadu model, yes, Tamil Nadu model has been very good, but Mumbai and this Maharashtra has become number one. And my aim is that India should be number one in the organ donation. That's the one part. The second part is that I still keep myself abreast with the knowledge, surgical and the clinical. So whether it is COVID and COVID related other things, see, this organ donation has given different challenges, like COVID related and vaccine related. Today you have this VITT, adverse reaction. And when the patient is donor who has got a cerebral injury, intracranial bleed. Now, whether it is COVID related, is it related to vaccine, or is it something which can be used? Now, in two other situations, you can't use that donor. So, I kept abreast with everything, what is world literature, what is evolving. So, I do that. Secondly, as far as surgical is concerned, I'm a member of American College of Surgeons, and every week there is this communication which comes, which have got some clinical cases. And I always read that what they are putting, what is their problem they face, and try to see what I will do if I have to do. So the case-based discussion which I will start is also extension from that point of view, because when these boys, they put up the case, I have to scratch my head. Okay, sometimes it happens that, and I accepted that some condition I am not faced in my whole life till now. So you have to learn how to occupy in a different way, but remain contemporary. And same way about the conferences. So I will take part in the webinars, either actively or even if it is interesting webinar, I will listen to it. Because I get the perspective from the younger generation, what they are talking about. For me, they are younger generation. Yes, they say that we are also grown up now because we are crossing 45, close to 50 or 60 ke beech mein. But I want to listen to what they are talking, what I used to talk at that time. So it's always you can keep occupied. And then my at least 2 hours in the morning go into my own physical fitness part, which is yoga, for at least 30 to 40 minutes. And second is the walk. The walk gives me different perspective. When I walk in the complex, I walk with the people. Most of them are younger. Okay. But yes, they have the mature age. They may not be senior citizen or the but mature age. But they are from different walk of life. Now, different walk of life, when we talk, I get a different perspectives also. I'm talking with the banker, I'm walking with the CA, I'm walking with a hotelier. Okay. So, and also at the same time, when they have some misconception about medical profession, I'm able to give them the right advice, or you can say the right perspective for those things. Because you know that these days medical profession, how maligned it has become in the public.
Yes, sir. So last a couple of points. You mentioned about in making India the organ donation capital. Two suggestions which have come from different countries and maybe from our own people. One is this issue of presumed consent, where it is presumed that you want to donate your organs unless you specifically say that I don't want to donate organs. Now, it's very difficult for a person to actually write that I don't want to donate organs. So you would probably get a greater pool with if you had an issue of presumed consent. And second thing is of a very thorny issue, which I know you have very strong views about, is of unrelated paid donors, where a suggestion has been that since one of the there is a need for organ on one side and need of finances on the other. I know your views about this, sir, but just for a purpose of discussion, why, and many times the middlemen act to siphon off money from both sides. Why not get a committee like, say, the ZTCC, which is in charge of ensuring for a certain percentage which goes towards administration costs. It's a not-for-profit basis, but it ensures that the right person gets the organ and the right person who's donating the organ gets what he or she, misguided or guided, has hopes to achieve. So both these issues, sir.
Yeah. So the first issue what we talk about is the presumed consent. Okay. Now, in the Western world, yes, there are countries where the presumed consent has been approved, and unless you have expressed desire not to donate, you are a donor. Okay. And the family cannot overrule that. It's like a law. In our country, it is as per law, the rights or the person who is in legal possession of the body, which is usually near relative, has all the rights on your body, unless you have written a will in which you have expressed something. So now, if we go on to the presumed consent in this country, the problem is the misuse of that. And that's where my reservation comes. That we keep on seeing, hearing, and it's not the hearsay, we are truth, that some people feel that we can create the donor if required. If there is some VIPs involved or some high-five person is involved, you can always create a donor. This presumed consent can start that kind of thing. So that's why I'm against. Till we are mature enough to handle such situations, we should not have to do that.
So forgive me for interrupting here, but isn't this a failure of our governance and supervision? So are we throwing out the baby with the bathwater? Should we not be improving our regulation for whatever, whether it is our judicial system, whether it is our administrative system? The net result is so many people are dying because of lack of organs.
So Rajesh, I won't agree that people say that law is not there and you should get law over law over law. Okay, the law is not the answer. It's a social problem. The people have to learn to be what are called socially awake and self-disciplined. What Mahatma Gandhi did, our freedom with Gandhiji got it. What he used to do, all those fast and yatras and all that, was a basically expression of a willpower to discipline yourself. Okay. Now, there was no law for Mahatma Gandhi. No law can do anything because you will always find a loophole in the law. That's what is happening. Law is very strong. If you look at the law in Indian for organ donations and other things, a very strong punitive action can be taken against the people who indulge into any criminal activity as far as organ donation is concerned. But That is not the answer, because people find the loopholes, and there are enough people who will cover up the things. We know the systems in our country. So it is the people, the society has to be self-disciplined. The moment we develop self-discipline, this is wrong, I will not. If it is red light, I will stop my car, I will not run across. The day that discipline comes, in 90% of the people, you can have anything you like. Okay, that's my view on this.
So
Now,
the last point, sir, about
Yeah.
paid donors.
Paid donors. Yeah. So what you are saying is what is being done by a middleman currently. Okay. That role should be taken over by the government or a NGOs or something of that. Something of that. Now, my view is why these paid donors? See, you have a near relative defined in the law. Unfortunately, law excludes our cousins, in-laws, uncles, aunts. Now, if you look at the Indian culture, we are not, yes, we have some nuclear families concept which is there in the bigger cities and all that, but still on basis, our basics is a big family, which includes all these extended members of the family, that is cousins, uncles, and aunts, and all those people. And we are all emotionally attached. We are affectionate to each other. Rare situation where the people fight among themselves, but majority of these people are having attachment. Now, that you convert into a unrelated is wrong. That's it. They are related, genetic related they are. So they should be in the one basket. Okay, that's one solution. So that will increase the number of the donors available within the extended family. And now comes the true unrelated. Here, abroad, there what is called altruistic donation. Here also the word is used in the law, altruistic donation. Their altruistic donation is like, today I decide, okay, I want to donate either my kidney or liver if somebody. So I donate it, I express the desire, it goes to the government. It remains in the database. And then it is not a directed donation. I have expressed, there is a donor recipient there, the government agencies are there, they will decide, yes, there is a match, you have expressed your desire, do you want to do it? You can change always, but you can do it. Here, that altruistic donation is not happening. Otherwise, all our monks, all our spiritual leaders should have pledged the organs. Okay? They have not done. Pledge the, I'm not saying pledge, actually donate it to the needy people.
Right.
Because that would have been altruistic donation. That would have altruistic donation. So we want to do something with the money. Now, the compulsion of money acceptance is a poverty. The person who accepts the money is
Absolutely.
That's why. Okay, it is selling the organ. So you are doing a commodification of the body and the body parts. Why we are doing it? We are saying he's a poor fellow, he can't eat, he can't support his family, that's why he can earn the money like this. How long that affects is? Majority of the cases you will find, whenever the people have, donors have gone to the complaining to the police, it is after 2 years, when they have enjoyed that money and finished that money. And now they want to extract the money from that rich recipient, extra money, by doing all this thing. So the solution for removing the poverty is not selling the organs. It is a social issue. It's a governmental issue. The society and the government should jointly work to lift the level of these poor people to the level where they don't feel the need to sell the organs. They can donate the organs if they have got altruistic mind, but they don't have to sell it. That is the.
Sure, sir. Thank you very much. It has been wonderful spending time with you. I think we could go on forever, but in the interest of keeping it short and relatively relevant, we should stop it here. Maybe we can have another interview at some other time. I really appreciate the fact that you have spent so much of your time with us.
Thank you, Rajesh. And I'm thankful to you and your organization for giving me the opportunity to express on this platform whatever views I have. They may be right or wrong. I don't know that because that's the people to judge what it is. Yes, I've lived with my very rigid principles. As Roy always says that, sir, you are not a flexible person. I understand that. I accept that. I don't deny it. But yes, sometimes everybody has to have his own personality and
Right,
live
sir.
with it. Some
And
have flexible, some have inflexible.
long live the differences. We all will pick up the best points from each of us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Raj.
Thank you.
Until next time, with another tete-a-tete by the checkup. See you guys soon.